Please be seated. Will the defendant please rise? Colonization, you are on trial for cultural genocide and theft of land, specifically by attempting to erase the language, as well as the spiritual and cultural practices of Indigenous people. You are also on trial for disconnecting people from their families, their communities, and their land. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
Please take the stand.
Put your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Prosecution, you may present your case.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is it true, colonization, that you believed the people who lived on this land when Europeans arrived were uncivilized and could be saved by European religion?
Well, I feel that when Europeans arrived, they brought thousands of years of civilization that had worked well for generations in Europe.
Did it ever occur to you that the people who lived on this land were also civilized for tens of thousands of years, and that it had also worked well for generations of people?
No, we don't see it that way.
I present to you Exhibit A. Do you know what these items were and are used for?
Of course. They're used to teach people to work, create art, and to pray.
And now Exhibit B.
No, it just looks like junk.
These Indigenous items were used before your people came here. We use these items to hunt, to build, to tell stories, and to pass down knowledge. This shows that the Indigenous people had well-established systems in place before the Europeans arrived, tools for working and ways of learning. This also shows that the Indigenous people had their own spirituality. Just because it was different doesn't mean that it's of any less value. I have a question for you. What was the purpose of colonizing Indigenous people?
We wanted the land and we needed the resources. And to do that, we had to create laws to separate and remove the Indigenous people from the land. We had better ideas for the use of that land, and it's not like they were using it anyway.
And how did you go about this, separating the people from their land?
We did many things. The Indian Act was created, which was a set of laws to govern and control Indigenous people, and establish reserve land set aside for Indians to keep them away from white people. We made it illegal for them to leave the reserve, illegal for them to vote, to go to university, to hire a lawyer, and so on. And this was so whites could start using the land, building towns, farming, logging, and mining. Residential schools were set up for the purpose of removing the children from the communities. And by disconnecting them from their culture and their identity, we were able to educate them about the wonders of European life. We were just trying to help.
Are you aware that the Indian Act and its policies, as well as the residential school system, led to the abuse, sickness, and death of Indigenous people?
And sometimes that's just what happens through the process of colonization.
Are you aware, however, that those policies and systems failed to solve the problem of civilizing the Indigenous people?
How is that?
Indigenous populations, languages, and cultures survived in spite of the best colonial efforts by Europeans. When they arrived here on this land, we wanted to share and introduce them to our way of life. Driven by greed, they sought to control the Indigenous people through policy, war tactics, and race-based laws. The Europeans began to destroy our food sources by overhunting and fishing. attempted to kill our system of governance by outlawing the potlatch from 1876 to 1951, and attempted to exterminate our language and culture by stealing our children and forcing them into residential schools. They made it illegal for us to defend our Indigenous rights until 1960. We have experienced continued interference from social workers and the child welfare systems, like the 1960s scoop that saw the removal of our children in massive numbers from families. These children were often placed into non-Indigenous families. Even today, they continue to separate us from our land and our culture and blame us for being a burden on society. These are problems we did not create for ourselves or for our people. The effects of colonization have been extremely damaging. Yes, these policies cause disconnection, loss, grief, anger, shame, and death. But they are met with a resistance and a strength and a resilience. Indigenous people have survived. We were never conquered. We are strong people and we are decolonizing. The Indigenous youth of today are an example of that. They are taking control of their own destiny by recognizing the truth of the past and the present. They are reconnecting with our history, their families, and their culture. No more questions, Your Honor. I believe I've made the case for a guilty verdict.
The session is now adjourned.